for those of you who are used to joining our webinars, just a couple of quick words. All of our members will be on mute, but of course you can ask a question at any time by clicking on that chat box that you will find at the bottom of your screen or sometimes at the top of your screen. And that's where you can pose any questions. And at the end of the webinar, then I will address all those questions. So didn't get a chance to allow folks to introduce themselves today. So we're going to carry right on. And I will start off as usual with a little bit of a brief explanation about what Wheel and Anchor is all about for all of our new members. I know that we have a lot of new members in our group. Yeah, Wheel and Anchor is a community of travelers from all across Canada. I started this together with my team about a little over 5 years ago now, on the heels of my 30 years of experience organizing travel for people from all across Canada. So, I've literally done trips to every continent on the planet. In doing so over the past couple of decades, I really recognize the difference between sort of, ordinary tour groups and when you have a group of people that have something in common. And the experience of that travel is so much different than, as I say, when it's just sort of an anonymous group. And so those who have participated on our Wheel and Anchor trips before, and I see a number of names on the list here of those who have been with us on a trip before, and I think you get a sense of that's what's all about. That is really what the focus of Wheel and Anchor is, which is creating these great shared experiences that, it's interesting. I just returned from hosting a trip in French Polynesia. And despite some twists and turns in the trip itself, if you read my newsletter from week before last, but at the end of the day, the goal was actually delivered. And I got an amazing email yesterday from one of the members on the trip and saying that she had the absolute time of her life. And the highlight for her was meeting people that she thinks will be lifelong friends. And that really touched me, because that is the essence of what we are about at Wheel and Anchor, is that we want you obviously to get well traveled. We design our trips in a way that is slower, that allows time to sort of soak in, to stop and smell the roses, as I like to say, and really have time on your own, but in the context of an organized trip. And also, as I say, most importantly, is becoming connected to your fellow travelers, because let's face it, you meet people that travelers are travelers, and we're distinct from those of us who aren't travelers. And you know what that's like when you go to a Christmas party, a holiday party, or something like that. You start talking to people, and the travelers are all with excitement and glee talking about the experiences that they've had over the past year, or the ones that they're looking forward to. And then there's everybody else, and there's nothing wrong with either side of it. But that sense of adventure that we share, that yearning to learn and understand the world and new cultures, that's what brings us together, particularly as Canadians, and particular as members of Wheel and Anchor. So that's a little bit of the essence of what we are all about. I'm just going to share a couple of pictures from our trip last year in Lyon, Burgundy. We had a small group. This is the typical type of program that we would usually run, with a small group of somewhere between sort of 12 to 16 people. And we really got to savor all of what Burgundy, Lyon, and so on is all about. And that's what this trip is. This trip is, I don't like to call them foodie tours, because we're not just going to eat, but let's face it, in this part of France, a lot of what there is to do is sample the food, the wine. Here we are tasting wine in one of the cellars in Beaune in Burgundy. And so there is that twist to it. And I can tell, actually, one of the members of our group that was on this trip is actually one of the most known restaurateurs in Canada. And he said to me, it was just an incredible experience. And he had tasted and experienced things that even he in his career had not had the benefit of doing. But that being said, I want to also say that this trip is not just, even if you're not somebody that's accustomed to wine and food, you don't have to to already have the knowledge. And I know that, you know, wine as an example is a subject that is daunting for people, because let's face it, most of us don't have a ton of knowledge. We're not all sommeliers. But the point of this trip is that you further your knowledge a little bit, and you understand when people talk about Burgundy wines, they talk about Côte de Nuits, they talk about Pouilly-Fuissé, they talk about some of these things as compared to other parts of France or other parts of the world. You at least further your knowledge a little bit. So, you know, and it makes you feel good when you come back home and you talk, it's like, oh yes, we're going to have this, delicious Burgundy wine that's so different, and you can talk a little bit about it. And it's a very fulfilling way. And that's the objective of this trip. It's really about education and knowledge and understanding. So anyway, let me carry on and introduce, first of all, the team. My name is Gordon Dreger. I'm the founder of Wheel and Anchor, a passionate traveler. I've been doing this for over 30 years. So I am the one that basically creates every single one of the tours that we put on. And I work with an amazing team of people, in particular, Barb, who's with me today on the webinar, and Paula, who are our trip specialists and who will be the ones that are there to answer your questions and get you signed up for any of the trips that you're interested in. And then, of course, we have a whole bunch of other people that do all of the logistics, and there are a lot of logistics because of the kind of trips that we operate. Today, I'm going to take you a little bit around on our usual digital journey around France's culinary heartland, where we're going to be heading next year in October of 2024. Just the geographical overview. I'm a map guy, so I was going to have the map included. Of course, here in the inset is the map of France. And the Burgundy region is here in the eastern part of the country, adjacent to Switzerland, in the Rhone and Saône valleys. The Rhone, of course, being one of the notable, most important rivers in France that flows out of the Alps and then down to the Mediterranean. And so Lyon, the second largest city in France after Paris, of course, and really a critical and a very important culinary destination for the French. So we're going to start in Lyon. You can fly actually from Montreal nonstop to Lyon on Air Canada. You can also fly to Lyon via other gateways if you're coming from out west. So it's a great starting point, easy to get to. We'll spend the first half of the trip in Lyon, where we're going to explore, of course, the city itself. We're also going to make a trip up to the foothills of the Alps to a little spa town called Aix-les-Bains. We're going to really get to know the city. Then we're going to travel overland up the Rhone Valley here, where we're going to be staying in Dijon, which, of course, you've heard the word before. That's where mustard originates from. But Dijon is really in the heart of the Côte de Nuits wine region of Burgundy, and of course Beaune, which is the heart of the overall Burgundian wine. So we're going to visit those places while we're in Dijon and have some amazing food and drink along the way. There's a lot of culinary highlights on this trip. We're going to be eating at places from, like, for example, the bouchon. Lyon is famous for its bouchon. I'll tell you a bit about that in a second. We're going to visit the Les Halles de Paul Bocuse. Paul Bocuse is, of course, probably the most famous and preeminent French chefs. And he has a whole market, which is like no market you've ever seen. We're going to spend the day tasting our way through the market. We're going to be having dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. I'm not sure yet if it'll be the same as we went last year. We went to Jérémy Galvan, a 2-star Michelin restaurant that was really over the top. Again, it blew everybody's mind. It was such a highlight of the trip. We're going to taste Dijon, and we're going to have aperitifs overlooking Dijon with the kir, that famous drink that's made with white wine and crème de cassis. Lots of interesting things, culinary highlights on this trip. And there's also time to do stuff on your own. That's important. I want to highlight that because part of the experience of dining, particularly in France, and what I always say to people ask me, oh, where should I eat in Paris? And I say, walk down some narrow alley and just walk into a place and you'll see some French chef, maybe with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth that's sticking his head out the door. I said, go in there, because that is what's going to give you an experience like you just won't have anywhere else. And so there's ample time for that. Just a quick word about the Michelin star experience. This is really probably the pinnacle culinary aspect of the trip. Last year, as I said, we went to see Jérémy Galvan, who's really one of the most up-and-coming chefs in France. And we sat down to a meal, which in total consisted of 22 dishes. So you couldn't even say that it was like a 6-course meal or a 7-course or an 8-course, because things were coming and going and put down, and there was the visual aspect, there was the all of the smells, the bouquets from all the different foods, and of course the tastes and everything, of course, in small portions. Again, it was, for I think that everybody that was in attendance, it was perhaps the best meal of their lives in many cases. I mean, if you're somebody that is accustomed to this kind of dining, maybe it won't. I'm curious to see what you say, but if you haven't done it before, I think once in your life, you want to treat yourself to something like this, and this is a great opportunity. And as I say, we developed quite a great relationship with Jeremy Galvan and his team at the restaurant there, and really had a marvelous time. So let me give you a few of the highlights of the trip. Obviously, the program itinerary goes into a little bit more detail, but I want to tell you all about Lyon. And the first thing I want to say is, as I said, you can fly easily into Lyon, either nonstop from Montreal or from other cities in Canada via either Montreal or some other gateway. When you arrive in, it is really a breathtaking city. And, it's, when people think of France, obviously we think about Paris. That's the first thing that comes to mind. For other people, it's the south of France, Provence, where we are going subsequent to this trip. But I actually like Lyon the best. Why? Because it is the secondary city, but no less sort of grand and impressive, but there is a more relaxed attitude. You know how it is in Paris, if you've been before. The people are all a little bit tense. It's like New York or London. Everybody's sort of on the go, and it's business and running around. And Lyon is a notch down from that. And because they're known as being the gastronomy capital of France, they take their time. They're out having a glass of wine on the side of the road, or a coffee, and it's a great vibe. So you'll arrive in. Of course, we don't plan a lot the first day. We'll have a little icebreaker event. We're centrally located. You can walk. It's a big city, but you can walk to most of the places of interest from where our hotel is located. And we're then going to meet our guide on the next day, and he's going to take us around town. First of all, we're going to head to the so-called Fourvière, which is the hillside on the west side of the Saône River. So Lyon has two rivers, the Rhone and the Saône, which actually come together at the confluence in the city. And the old town is basically along the banks of the Saône River. So we're going to go right away in the morning up the funicular at Fourvière to the Notre Dame Cathedral, where you'll have an incredible view, and it will also give you a bit of an orientation as to what is where in the city. I think that on our last trip, most people really hung around the old town because there's so many little nooks and crannies and shops and all the little narrow corridors and pathways. Like you don't really have to venture too far out of the downtown, and you can easily spend a week there. So we're going to wander around the old town. We have a lovely guide there. We'll have the same chap again for our trip next year because he has a great French joie de vivre, but at the same time super knowledgeable and insightful about all of the details in France. And one of the first things that we're gonna do on the culinary scene is stop in at a bouchon. And bouchon actually in French is like branches of trees, and they are little sort of mini restaurants that feature local cuisine with a glass of wine, small bites. You could almost say like tapas in Spain, but we're not in Spain, we're in France. So it's all about the bouchon. So you get to sample some of those things, and then you'll have a good chunk of the afternoon, as I say, to wander around the Saône River. This is where the funicular here goes up to the top of the hill. So there's stuff to explore on top, stuff to explore along the riverbank. There's such great walking. It's such really a picturesque city. The next day, we're going to make our first trip out of town. We're going to head to Aix-les-Bains, which is not far away. It's about an hour by train, and we're going to take the regional train because, again, I like including local transportation. It's quite a scenic journey. The trains in France are brilliant, and so we'll make the trip out to Aix-les-Bains, which is obviously nestled in the foothills of the Alps. You can see how the mountains sort of start to rise up in the distance, and it's quite a famous spa town. So we'll be taken around. We'll have a view. We'll go through the old town. Hopefully there'll be a market here or there on. It's like there's a market on all the times in these small towns in France. where you get to taste things that, you know, one place, every single place has their specialty, their thing that's a little bit different. And we'll culminate our trip in Aix-les-Bains with a scenic boat tour on Lac Bourget, which you see here. So we'll have a delicious lunch on board and have a relaxing cruise around to see the town and see the lovely countryside around it. The following day will be our, well, one of our many culinary experiences. And here again, we're going to head off with our guide to the famous Les Halles de Paul Bocuse. So they have, this whole market is named after the famous French chef, Paul Bocuse. And if you picture what a market looks like in Canada, this is like that times 10. This is probably the ultimate in food markets you'll find, not just in France, but anywhere. The stuff they have is absolutely incredible. Being that it's the most famous market named after this French chef, it's not the least expensive place in the world, but nevertheless, we're going to go around and visit a few of the vendors, tasting some of the local cheeses. You'll never even imagine. I think we all know how much cheese is produced in France, but when you see it all there laid out in front of you, it's mind-blowing, truly. We'll taste some of the sausages, the quenelle, which is the local dumplings that Lyon is so famous for. And so we'll basically taste our way through. We won't even bother having lunch, because by the time you get out of the market, you won't want to have any more food until later in the evening. So we'll drag you back to the old town in the afternoon, where we'll visit a silk workshop. Lyon was also quite famous for its silks, particularly back in the 19th century. And this lovely woman will still is inside one of the original silk factories, where you get to see how they created these wonderful silks. And of course, if you wander around France, you'll almost always see French women wearing these beautiful patterned silks. This is one of the original places that they produce that. We'll also, if there's any room left in the belly, we'll try some of the local pastries that they have. They have this terrific one that's made with chocolate ganache and marzipan, and it'll blow your mind. So we're definitely going to keep you full on this trip. There's a whole day designated to just seeing Lyon on your own. And I recall there's a whole bunch of different museums. And I remember from the last trip, literally everybody went in different directions. We'll give you some sort of a few ideas of what you could do. But because it's such a great walking town, and there's so many monuments to check out that we won't include in the tour, because of course not everybody's interested in this museum or that museum or the city hall or the other cathedral. So this way you can kind of explore a little bit on your own. One of the interesting places to visit is the so-called Musée des Confluences, which is an anthropological museum that is situated at where the Rhone and Saône rivers meet. It's quite a dramatic structure, very impressive from the outside, but also on the inside, it's a neat display of the history of this region of France. And of course, the significance that these two rivers played in the settling of this area over the last century. So it's a very cool spot. There's a big shopping and leisure center nearby where the rivers meet. It's a quite a gentrified part of Lyon. So this is one place you could spend a day. We're going to give you a Lyon City card, so you actually can choose from a whole bunch of different options. I know some of the folks went on a little short boat cruise on the river that goes down the Saône and up the Rhone. A million different things to do, but the point is you'll have the time to do them, and hopefully time to rest up a little bit and not eat too much during the day, because this is the evening that we're going to go out for our Michelin star experience. We will advise more specifically exactly which restaurant we're going to go around 3 months beforehand, because we have to actually book our reservation 3 months beforehand. I'm gunning for Jérémy Galvan, assuming that the timing works and that they will accept us, because a lot of these restaurants, you won't find tour groups in these restaurants, let me tell you that. When we showed up last time with our group of 12, we were situated at 2 tables, and we definitely sort of dominated the restaurant, which probably only had about 24 seats in it to begin with. But again, that's what makes it particularly special, because it feels like we almost have it all to ourselves. And it will be, as I say, an experience that you will never forget. The next day, we're going to wave goodbye to Lyon and then make our way up to Dijon. We're going to go by private minivans or minibuses. And that's going to allow us to sort of make some stops along the way. One of them in particular will be at Pouilly-Fuissé. You've probably heard of the white wine called Pouilly-Fuissé, which is one of the more famous ones from the region, made with Chardonnay grapes. It's interesting because I'm not personally usually a big fan of Chardonnay, and I know a lot of Canadians aren't, because, we became sort of overwhelmed by Chardonnays from California and Australia with their very, very oaky, buttery context to them. And of course, those Chardonnays that were created in the New World were modeled after the ones that come from Burgundy, from this region. And so what's interesting is to sample Pouilly-Fuissé and see, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, how Chardonnay was actually meant to be done, because they do it really, really well. So we'll combine a tasting at Pouilly-Fuissé with an artisanal lunch that will be absolutely delicious. The French definitely know how to match food and wine. And later on that afternoon, we will show up in the town of Dijon, which of course doesn't need introduction, because that's obviously where mustard came from. And we'll spend the next day touring around Dijon, probably starting with the Place de la Libération, the Freedom Square, if you will, Liberation Square, with the very grand Duke's Palace that's next to it, with this incredible stone staircase inside. We're going to wander around the area. We're going to head over to the market that was actually designed by Gustave Eiffel, the same guy that obviously built the Eiffel Tower. We'll stop and enjoy the regional delicacies of this part of northern Burgundy. And in the end, we're going to stop at a very famous spot called Maison Philippe le Bon, that you see pictured here. It's not a great picture, but from the rooftop here, actually, you get a great view overlooking Old Dijon. We'll sample a kir. For those of you who haven't had it, a famous aperitif in France, which is made with white wine and crème de cassis, which is black currant liqueur. And then we'll have some lovely delicacies as well, that will probably substitute for dinner, as in most cases, because whenever we say, oh, small stack and delicacies, people usually come away thinking, I can't eat another bite. That's usually how it goes on our trips. We'll make a side trip again back southwest of here to Beaune. As I mentioned, Beaune, of course, is the real heart of Burgundy. And I remember the first time I went to Beaune, which is probably 30 years ago, and it's a really, really charming town. A little bit touristy, because everybody that passes through this part of France stops in Beaune. And the last time we visited Beaune from Lyon, and we didn't really, it was a little bit too tight of a schedule. So this way we are doing it from Dijon. That frees up a lot more time for us to explore the town. In particular, we will take more time to see the Hospice de Beaune, which is a 15th century hospital that is an absolute architectural gem. Our guide there, she's a lovely gal from the States, actually, that's lived in France for the better part of 20 years. She gives an amusing tour, but also a very insightful tour of the hospice and all the different rooms. And basically, it's a little walk through sort of medical history from back, in the 15th and 16th centuries, and what things were like then and how people lived in this rather grand, I mean, you wish kind of that hospitals would look like that today. Very fascinating building, and the most impressive thing to see in Beaune. But we'll also visit Fayot, which is a family-owned mustard maker, very proud people. And I really enjoyed this trip because we learned how they really built up the mustard business from several generations. And they pride themselves on the fact that they use only French mustard seeds. And one of the tidbits that I didn't know, of course, is that like 80% of the mustard production in the world comes from Canada, and including most of the mustard that is produced in France. They import the mustard seeds from Canada. But these guys are very, of course, knowing that we're Canadian, there was a lot of laughs exchanged, because they're like, no, our mustard is made in France. and learning a lot about not only the history, but the current day challenges of mustard. Because of course, when we were there like 2 years ago, there was a mustard shortage in France. There was a huge crisis. You couldn't buy mustard in most of the local grocery stores. In fact, even at the mustard factory, they only allowed us to buy a maximum of 2 little jars per person, because we had a mustard crisis in Canada. I didn't even know about it, but the little tidbits that you learn along the way. And our final day trip in France will be to Côte de Nuits, which is the very famous wine region where some of, again, Burgundy's most famous reds come from. Burgundy, of course, is known for Pinot Noir. That's the basis of pretty much all Burgundian wines. They do make a few other varietals there, but Burgundy means Pinot Noir. And so for those of you who are fans of Pinot Noir, or maybe you're not, maybe you don't really understand it, again, you'll find some great insight here as we go around the region, tasting some different Pinots. Some will perhaps stop at some of the more famous appellations like Gevrey Chambertin. If you walk into a liquor store back home and you go into the France Burgundy section, you'll for sure see wines that come from Gevrey Chambertin, which is, as I say, one of the more famous appellations in the region. And you'll get to learn all about that kind of stuff. And then in the evening, we will have our farewell dinner, which will be another feast, another culinary delight in Dijon, before we have to say farewell and make our way onwards, either elsewhere in Europe or onto our next trip. So on the departure day, we will either provide you with a ticket to on the TGV, on the high-speed train directly to Paris, to the Gare de Lyon in Paris, from where we'll either have a transfer to the airport, or perhaps some of you will stay a few extra days in Paris, or you can join us and combine the trips, which is what I think most of the group did last year. They combined our Lyon Burgundy trip with our Provence and Côte d'Azur. So if you want to cover, well, the best of France, there's so many great parts of France. I can't say it's the best, but I mean, the Provence in the south of France, the Côte d'Azur, is for sure one of the more famous regions. So that trip is immediately after, and we spend a number of days in Nice, and as well as in Haute-Provence and near Avignon. So it's another terrific trip. The webinar for that was done a couple of weeks ago. You can find that on our YouTube channel, or of course on our website. So that is the summary of the trip. Again, details in the program itinerary. This trip, as I say, starting from the 29th of September to the 8th of October of next year. Pricing here in Canadian dollars. Inclusions, we've got 9 nights of accommodation and lots of different meals. We generally have breakfast and one other meal in the day, just because what we find is that people otherwise get overwhelmed with food. So it also gives you time to kind of sample stuff on your own. We have some great local guides. We give you a city card in Lyon so that you can wander around and use the local transportation and check out that city. So overall, it includes a lot. Of course, airfare we arrange separately because our members are coming from all across Canada. Cancellation insurance, which we really strongly recommend. And then, of course, the beverages at the Michelin star restaurant we leave out, because some people, I know last time some of the folks opted for the whole wine pairing menu, and they had a different glass with every course, and we were all staggering home a little bit after that. Other folks like to be a little bit more modest. So we leave that out at your own discretion. And just to give you a sense of airfares in and out of Lyon, if you're coming from the east, based on economy class, that's you're looking at around $1,000. Plus or minus these days. We never know with airfares. They're as volatile as ever. And of course, from the West Coast, it's a little bit more. If you join us for this trip before the end of the year, we'll give you a couple of $100 off. This enables us to make commitments to our hotel partners. The hotels that we choose, increasingly difficult to hold allotments without significant financial commitments. So that's why we try to get a critical mass of folks joining early on. And that enables us to get some savings that we pass on to you. So time to address any questions that might have come in. Barb, let me know if our members have any questions on this trip.
Yeah, just a couple, it looks like. Because this is a lot of food and wine involved. If people have special dietary requirements, how does that work on a trip like this?
Yep, dietary requirements can absolutely be taken into consideration. So we say that, and I always have to qualify this a little bit because we ran into a couple of times situations where if you have super strict dietary requirements, so for those who are very strictly vegan, for example, they can't always. So in the where we have the special culinary dinners like the Michelin star experience, those guys can do anything, and what they can create, for example, on a vegetarian basis or on a gluten-free basis is really quite remarkable. But some of the other experiences along the way, we just have to sort of we can make do. But we always have folks that have this allergy or this preference for food. We can accommodate everything, unless it's like super extreme, or if you're somebody that's so celiac that you can't even see a grain of flour or gluten. Those are the only situations where we have to have a conversation to understand a little bit better the nature of those dietary restrictions. But for the most part, we can do anything.
Perfect. And on a side note, if people don't drink alcohol and you're going to these vineyards and stuff, is there always a non-alcoholic option
There's
for them?
always a non-alcoholic option, absolutely. So we will always serve something else. And so I do encourage, even if you're not somebody that, if you don't enjoy alcohol, or if you don't like wine, or not as much wine, you still will definitely get a lot of benefit from this trip. That's why we don't call it exclusively a food and wine trip, because there is so much more to it than that. And we'll cater to anybody's needs. And if there's a question about that, of course, Barb, you and Paula can address the specific request, and we'll take care of it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And let's talk a little weather.
Oh, yes, weather. Well, this is a great time of the year to go. I don't like to make any commitments on weather because it seems like everywhere I go these days, the weather isn't what it's supposed to be. Generally better, I think. But the end of September, typically you're looking at days in and around 20 degrees. That being said, it could be 25. It could also be 15, but usually the daily average temperatures are sort of in and around 20, 21 degrees. So it's a perfect time of the year to go. You'll probably get a spot of rain here or there. It's not a particularly rainy time, but it's also not the dry season either. I mean, these parts of France, the weather is much like at home, but a couple of degrees warmer.
Right. Okay, perfect. So far those are the questions that have come in, but people are welcome to reach out to myself or Paula if they have any specific questions or want to discuss the trip further. And if anybody is interested, they should reach out to us, because we do have an additional information document that we send people, and it goes a lot into the nitty-gritty in terms of flights and transfers and everything.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot more detailed information. And of course, Paula and Barb can answer questions to your specific situation. So yeah, take time to read all of the information. Yeah, as I say, reach out to us if you have any questions. Would love to have you on board. This is such a delicious trip, and I use that term intentionally. It's a delicious trip. We'd love to have you on board and enjoying all of the delights of France. Take care. We got some great webinars coming up next week. I think we've got Croatia and Antarctica. Check out our newsletter this weekend, where we'll have the links to all of our upcoming webinars between now and the end of the year. It's coming up fast. So take care in the meantime, and we'll catch you all again very, very soon. Bye for now.